major nuclei, that's the basal ganglia or the substantia nigra. So we talked about the corpus striatum and the basal ganglia. And we said these regions or this nuclei is responsible for the interpretation or is responsible for aiding our coordination, our balancing, fine-tuning our movements. So it does this in concert with the cerebellum, which we know that is responsible for coordination, balance, and perception. We went on to now look at the covering of the brain. That's the meninges. Talked about the various layers. Then I remember we all went on lastly to look at the cavities that are found in the brain. That's the ventricles, where we talked about the lateral ventricles, the third ventricle, and the fourth ventricle. We talked about CSF production, which is by the ependymal cells, also known as the choroid plexus, which lines these ventricles. So CSF is constantly in motion. It's constantly being produced, constantly circulating, and constantly being drained. So the drainage are from the higher centers down to the lower ventricles. So from the lateral ventricles, it passes through the foramen of Monro. From the third ventricle into the fourth ventricle, passes through the cerebral aqueduct. And from there, fourth ventricle, it goes through the central canal down to the spinal cord, then finds its way into the subarachnoid space, circulates upwards again, then comes out or exits the central nervous system through the arachnoid granulations and joins the dural venous sinuses. But we did explain that this drainage can be blocked, and this will cause CSF to accumulate within the cavities, causing the brain to enlarge, pushing against the hard cranial bones, and that has consequences. So we talked about hydrocephalus, I do remember on that. And I remember our brother was helping us on how clinically some of these conditions are managed, where we use the ventriculoperitoneal shunts run from the brain cavities into the peritoneum just to aid the drainage. And I think I do remember again, a colleague as well did ask about the level in which the spinal cord terminates and to which extent do we have the dura extending to, which our time could favor us to answer that. But I asked that he just gave us an answer by just Googling. So simply, that is the H2 level. So today we want to look at the last aspect as far as this whole topic on the nervous system is concerned. So I want to look at the autonomic nervous system. I think this we have looked at this already as far as the opportunity I gave for searching is concerned. So let me hear, let me hear from the class or some friend, some of us will help us. What can we say about the autonomic nervous system? How is that whole circuit like? How is the structure? Basically. So let me hear from us. The autonomic nervous system. Yeah, hello class. Please, who is helping us? Okay. As usual, leadership by example. Let's hear from our class reps. Attack Practice Center. Madam Patience, you just called me. Can you help us? Okay, we are having Madam Esther Akins. Let's hear you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So please, with the autonomic nervous system, it forms part of the peripheral nervous system, and its main function is to control involuntary actions or somebody functioning, and it can be categorized into two, where we have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system looks at what we usually term as fight or flight. Okay, where when the body is undergoing any stressor that needs a very rapid and immediate action to be taken. So in instances like this, under the flight or fight, we can have usually most of the physiological activities of the body increases. Okay, so we can have heart rate increasing. Okay, we can have muscle tone or even strength increasing. Okay, then with the parasympathetic, that one looks at rest and digest. Okay, so that one will usually slow down the physiological functions of the body. So these two, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, they sort of work in an opposing manner, and that is to just help maintain the balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Esther. I appreciate that. Okay, I saw another hand up. Okay, there was a hand up, or the person is now down now.
So please, I wanted to say, but it's like she has said, oh, that's why I put my hand down.
Oh, okay, Madam Mariam, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, the autonomic nervous system is basically a part of the peripheral nervous system. You remember when we were talking about the whole nervous system, we talked about uh, each structure or composition. You can look at it based on function, where we have a sensory division and motor division. So we looked at the aspect that where the motor division is concerned, we have the somatic aspect and we have the autonomic aspects. So where the somatic aspects simply are then part of the nervous system which goes to innervate the skeletal muscles. But for the aspect of the autonomic, that goes to innervate the glands and the smooth muscles and the cardiac muscles, even as Madam Esther just explained to us. So basically, they are motor pathways, or is related to motor, simply to put it. But each structure is such that there are two sets of nerves as far as the pathway is concerned. We have one portion which typically is called the preganglionic, and the other aspect called the postganglionic. Ladies and gentlemen, simply, this preganglionic or postganglionic are basically the axons of these autonomic nerve cells. Remember when we were describing the spinal cord, we talked about the white matter being on the periphery and the gray matter being central, as opposed to that of the brain. Now, for the gray matter in the center, we saw that it assumes a butterfly or an H shape, as we see over here. And this H shape gray matter, we did describe an anterior column and a posterior column, where the anterior column, basically the ventral aspect, relates to motor, whilst the posterior aspect or the dorsal relates to sensory impulses that are coming into the spinal cord. But there was also this aspect, which we say is the lateral column, like what we see here. So this H-shaped gray matter, we are seeing that on the lateral aspects, there are some projections, and this is the lateral column. And I did make mention that this lateral column basically is the residence of the soma or the cell bodies of the autonomic nerve cells or the autonomic neurons. Now, from what we are seeing here, axons of these autonomic neurons arise from the cell bodies which are in the lateral gray horn. Now, they exit by joining the spinal nerve. However, just by exiting from the spinal nerve, the proximal portion of the spinal nerve, they now enter into their unique region called the sympathetic chain or sympathetic ganglia. Now, this sympathetic chain simply implies a collection of cell bodies outside the spinal cord. So we see them forming something like a long chain extending down from the cervical region all the way to the sacral aspects. So what we see here is what we refer to as the sympathetic ganglia or the sympathetic chain. Ladies and gentlemen, it's very beautiful when you see this in human cadaver. You will see that it looks like the rosary that our brothers and sisters in Roman, the rosary that they use. You see it as a rosary of sorts, extending and lying just adjacent to the vertebra of the individual at the posterior or at the back wall of the human body. So it looks like a long chain of sorts. So I don't know, perhaps that's why it's described as a sympathetic chain or ganglia. Now, this ganglia of sorts acts as a relay center, such that the neurons that are arising from the lateral gray horn, because they arise from the lateral gray horn and terminate at this ganglia, they now are described as the pre-ganglionic. So before the ganglia neurons. Now at the sympathetic ganglia, we also have neurons also arising from the ganglia. And these neurons extend from the ganglia and go to innervate this cardiac muscles or smooth muscles or the glands we are talking about. So because they arise after the ganglia, that's why they are called post-ganglionic neurons. So ladies and gentlemen, we can see For example, nerve fibers or preganglionic fibers arising from the lateral gray horn, they enter the sympathetic ganglia or the sympathetic chain. And within the chain, they now relay their impulses to the soma of the postganglionic. So in this diagram, the green is ascribed as the preganglionic, whilst the red is the postganglionic. So we are seeing that when they terminate there, they synapse onto the dendrites of the soma of the postganglionic. And now the postganglionic will now also extend their axons to go and innervate the various viscera or glands. This still explains the same thing as we just described. From the gray matter, the lateral horn, we see this preganglionic arising. They join the spinal nerve, and now they exit into the sympathetic chain or the sympathetic ganglia or trunk. And from there, the postganglionic will also arise to innervate their visceral organs. Even as explained by our sister, this whole complex system is basically made up of two components, the sympathetic aspects and the parasympathetic aspects. Now, basically, the sympathetic aspects are the part of the autonomic nervous system that comes into play under stress conditions, which demands a fight or which demands you flying away. The structure basically for this sympathetic division is just the same as the diagram I used to explain my introduction slide on the whole topic of the autonomic nervous system. Preganglionic arising from the lateral gray horn, their axons extend into the sympathetic chain or ganglia. And now the postganglionic fibers also arise from the sympathetic chain and extend to the viscera or the glands. A key thing to say as far as the sympathetic division is concerned is that there are some preganglionic fibers which do not synapse within the sympathetic chain or ganglia, but they extend into a faraway ganglia, which commonly sometimes lie very closer to the viscera. These ganglia are therefore called collateral ganglia. So there are some preganglionic fibers which extend beyond the sympathetic chain and rather extend into the collateral ganglia. And from there, they synapse onto the postganglionic fibers. The postganglionic fibers would also then arise from there and, as usual, go to their effector organs. This collateral ganglia, there are various forms. We have the submandibular ganglia, we have the otic ganglia. I think we have the celiac ganglia. I think there are about 5 of them scattered in the body, which these preganglionic fibers, they extend to these collateral ganglia for synapsing. Those preganglionic fibers which extend beyond the sympathetic ganglia, but extend into the collateral ganglia, commonly form what is called the splanchnic nerves. And majorly, those postganglionic fibers that arise from this collateral ganglia are those that will extend to innervate viscera that are found within the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. Whilst that which synapse within the sympathetic chain or ganglia, their postganglionic commonly extend to innervate viscera that are found within the thoracic regions. So in some textbooks, you come across splanchnic nerves. This is how they are formed and for which reason they are ascribed this particular name. They are preganglionic fibers which do not synapse onto the sympathetic ganglia, but extend to the collateral ganglia, from which the postganglionic arise to innervate viscera within the abdominal regions and the pelvic regions. So we can see from this very particular picture, a preganglionic fiber. Ideally, we are supposed to have a sympathetic chain here, but it extends beyond and goes all the way to this ganglia. And now we have seen the autonomic neuron also extending to now innervate the effector organ. For the parasympathetic system, whereas we saw the cell bodies of the preganglionic fibers situated within the lateral gray horn of the spinal cord. So, majorly arising from the thoracic segment onto the lumbar segments into around the S1 segment. For the parasympathetic aspect of the autonomic nervous system, their cell bodies of the preganglionic are commonly located within the brainstem nuclei of certain cranial nerves. I don't know whether since our discussion on the nervous system, I did make mention of cranial nerves, but I do remember that if you're talking about the nervous system structurally, you can have the peripheral aspect of the nervous system to include the 31 pairs of spinal nerves and the cranial nerves. And there are 12 cranial nerves. So these cranial nerves simply are nerves that are within the cranial cavity, but they extend beyond the cavity to the lower region. So we have about 12 of them: the olfactory, the optic, the oculomotor, the trochlea, the 5, the trigeminal, 6, the abducens, 7, the fascia, 8, the glossopharyngeal, 9, the vestibulocochlear, 10, the vagus, 11, the accessory, and 12, the hypoglossal nerve. Each of these cranial nerves have their own functions. But in talking about the parasympathetic division of the ANS, the preganglionic cell bodies are situated amongst the 3rd cranial nerve, the 7th cranial nerve, the 9th cranial nerve, and the 10th cranial nerve. Not only that, some are also found within the lateral gray horn of the S2, S3, and the S4 segment of the spinal cord. People, what this implies is that as the cranial nerves, oculomotor, facial, glossopharyngeal, and vagus extend from the cranial cavity, they also possess or carries parasympathetic fibers, which are preganglionic. And these parasympathetic preganglionic fibers will now extend and now go and synapse onto the postganglionic, which are found at the collateral ganglia, which these ganglia commonly are majorly situated very close to the structure they innervate or the structure which they stimulate. So, for example, what we are seeing here is the S2, S3, S4 level. They are assuming that this segment of the spinal cord is from the S2, S3. The lateral horn of the gray matter found within this S2 to S4, preganglionic fibers will arise and they will extend as far as a ganglia which is very close to the organ. And from this ganglia, we are seeing the postganglionic arising, extending to innervate the effector organ. Ladies and gentlemen, because the autonomic ganglia or the collateral ganglia of the parasympathetic are very close to the effector organs, it makes the postganglionic fibers to become relatively short. So people, as you can appreciate here, this is the point of synapsing. So this, what you want to mean is that this place is the ganglia, an autonomic ganglia, and the preganglionic is ending here. But we are seeing that the postganglionic is also arising. And look at the length of the postganglionic relative to the preganglionic. That's one uniqueness as far as the structure of the postganglionic fiber of the parasympathetic nervous system is concerned. They are relatively short. Now, the parasympathetic fibers which run along the cranial nerves, the oculomotor, the facial nerve, they will end up having influence on the various target or effector organs which these cranial nerves goes to innervate. So the vagus nerve, for example, is the longest cranial nerve. It extends through the neck, through the thoracic, and even into the abdominal region. And it is via the vagus nerve that the parasympathetic are able to have influence on some of the abdominal viscera, producing a parasympathetic effect. So this vagus nerve, because it extends far beyond the cranial cavity, even to the abdominal cavity. So before it gets to the abdominal, obviously it has to traverse through the thoracic.
What is this?
Ends up innervating viscera that are found within the thoracic, and even that are found within the abdominal regions. Ladies and gentlemen, basically, this summarizes the structure of these major components of the ANS.
Why is
Two motor pathway, a preganglionic and a postganglionic. For the sympathetic, the preganglionic and the postganglionic can be very long. The fiber can extend far distances. We have the preganglionic of the sympathetic ending at the sympathetic chain. The postganglionic will arise from there to innervate the effector organs, commonly those within the thoracic segments. Some preganglionic may go beyond the sympathetic ganglia, then extend to collateral ganglia. This collateral ganglia, we have postganglionic arising, and these are the nerves that will go to innervate the pelvic organs and abdominal organs as far as the sympathetic division is concerned. We have also described the parasympathetic as these neurons of the preganglionic, they are majorly found within the S2 to S4 segment of the spinal cord. And these preganglionic neurons also are found among certain cranial nerves, which are found on the brainstem. So the oculomotor, the facial, glossopharyngeal, and the vagus. So as they extend, they carry preganglionic fibers along. The synapse on collateral ganglia, which are very close to the effector organs. This makes the postganglionic to become very short. Some few things to note. Even as our sister Esther said, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic produce opposite effects. But uniquely to say also is that the effects that a parasympathetic may produce on one effector organ, in another effector organ, it may produce a different effect. So for example, parasympathetic will be very important when it comes to stimulation of the muscles within the wall of the bladder. However, when it comes to the heart, it rather inhibits the contractions. So it rather inhibits the more rapid beating of the heart, as we may expect it to be differently when it comes to a different structure. A key thing to also make mention is that in some organs, their opposing effects may act together just for the organ to be able to have some coordination of sorts. So for example, if you take the reproductive organ of the males, specifically the erectile tissue, the corpus spongiosum and the corpus cavernosum. When it comes to erection, the parasympathetic comes into play. But when it comes to ejaculation, the sympathetic nervous system rather comes into play. It is via these opposing effects in the same organ that helps the organ to be able to have relevance as far as the human body is concerned. There are some organs also that may have exclusively only one division of the autonomic nervous system. But this implies that an inhibition of that very arm of the ANS, then the opposing effect obviously will happen. So for the sweat glands, for example, and for the smooth muscles within the blood vessels, they only have innervations from the sympathetic nervous system. They don't have parasympathetic influence. Now this means that the moment the sympathetic nervous system is shut down or is inhibited, the opposite effect will happen, despite there is no innervation from the parasympathetic. There are many organs or viscera we can talk about. The various effects that the various arms of the ANS can have on them. So we are seeing here, whilst the parasympathetic is decreasing the heart rate, the sympathetic increases the heart rate. While the parasympathetic will cause the smooth muscle of the bladder to contract, the sympathetic will cause it to relax. We are seeing the blood vessel also having only parasympathetic or having only sympathetic influence, but no parasympathetic influence, and many others we see here. This also explains the same thing as already discussed the previous slide. So this also is so simply just to explain the various organs and the various influences that may come to them from the sympathetic arm and from the parasympathetic arm as well. So we are seeing the reproductive system, we are seeing a sympathetic influence here, we are seeing a parasympathetic influence too as well. We are seeing the blood vessels a sympathetic influence, but no parasympathetic influence, as already said. Still the same thing in this very particular diagram. Let's talk a little physiology. Communication of neurons are via neurotransmitters. So this preganglionic and postganglionic fibers, we are saying that there is a point at which they synapse. So for example, in the sympathetic division, we have the sympathetic ganglia. At the point of synapse, the preganglionic fibers release the neurotransmitter called the acetylcholine. It is this acetylcholine that will cause stimulation of the postganglionic. And they will also now carry the impulses and extend to the effector organ. Generally speaking, the preganglionic of the sympa and the parasympa, all of them secrete acetylcholine. However, when it comes to the postganglionic, for the sympathetic, most of the postganglionic secrete the neurotransmitter called the norepinephrine. The communication via this neurotransmitter underlines the drugs that we commonly use. So we have drugs that are of sort sympathomimetic. So drugs that mimic the sympathetic influence. And we also have parasympathomimetic. So those drugs conversely also mimic the parasympathetic influence. So in case there's a pathology to any of these aspects of the ANS. So majorly, that sums up our discussion on the autonomic nervous system. To end with is the blood supply of the brain, which I think this will discuss when we looked at the cardiovascular system. But just as a review, remember that blood is being pumped from the left ventricle into the aorta. And on the aorta arises various branches, those that are going down to the lower body segment and those that are climbing upwards. So remember, we have the carotid arteries, which carry oxygen-rich blood, and just at the roots of the skull, they bifurcate into the internal and the external carotid artery. The external will come to supply the superficial aspect of the skull, whilst the internal will continue and pass through the foramen magnum and enter into our skull. Just at the base of the skull, it forms a beautiful anastomosis, which we call the circle of Willis, as we see in this very particular structure. The relevance of this anastomosis is to aid supply of the various nerve cells, should in case there's an occlusion at one aspect. So we are seeing the internal carotid here. We are seeing it joining or communicating with the basilar artery, which is formed by the left vertebral artery and the right vertebral artery, which runs within the foramen transversarium of the cervical vertebra. So this basilar artery will communicate with the internal carotid artery, and from there they give various branches: the anterior communicating artery, the posterior communicating artery, and the middle cerebral arteries as well, which is one common vessel that is commonly prone to certain pathologies, which results in stroke that we do normally see. As usual, all these various systems we talk about, we speak so well of them, but those are, to say, is within an averagely young person, in quotes. This implies that as we age, things change. And the functions of these various systems will also be impacted as well. For the nervous system, the number of neurons decreases. Not only that, the sensory aspect is also affected. So the rate at which a person may perceive sensory info will therefore also decrease as well. The motor aspect is also being affected. The cerebellar functions are also being affected. That obviously impacts a person's balance and a person's coordination. And as far as the nervous system is responsible for integrating the various systems, it will consequentially have impacts on the other systems. So, for example, in the urinary system, we can have incontinences occurring as well. So this ends our discussion as far as the nervous system as a whole is concerned. I pause here. Any contribution from the class or anything unique as far as discussion of autonomic nervous system is concerned? Okay, Madam Esther Akins, let's hear you.
Okay, so thank you very much. But please, if you could go back on the when you started with the postganglion, preganglion systems, then yes, I think I got lost a bit at that area. So if you can go over that a bit again, thank you.
Okay. So, Madam Esther, simply to put, when we say a ganglia, A ganglia is simply a collection of cell bodies of neurons, a collection of cell bodies of, of neurons. Remember, we talk about a neuron having a cell body and also having an axon or processes, which are the axons and the dendrites. So you can have a lot or a cluster of cell bodies of these neurons, and they form what is called ganglia, commonly outside the peripheral nervous system. Now, when you look at the posterior body wall, so that means a cadaver, if they take away the person's heart, the person's lungs, and they take away the person's abdominal and viscera all out, you are going to see the person's posterior body wall with the vertebral column on the posterior aspect of the body. But you will see closely by the side of the vertebral column that something like a rosary of sorts is extending from the thoracic aspect all the way to the sacral aspect of the vertebral column. So they lie by the side of the vertebral column. That rosary, so, is what is referred to as paravertebral ganglia. Para means by side, vertebra by the vertebra. So this paravertebral ganglia simply is collection of cell bodies that are lying by the side of the vertebra, and they extend like a chain longitudinally down. Now, for the autonomic nervous system, we are saying it's made up of two parts, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Now, for the sympathetic, it's preganglionic fibers. Their cell bodies are found within the lateral gray horn of the spinal cord. So T1, T2, all the way to S1. I am saying they are cell bodies. So preganglionic cell bodies. That means their axons are going to arise from this lateral gray horn. And axons are what carry the impulses away from the cell body. So in carrying the impulses away from the cell body, they will go and end up within this ganglia, which is found on the sides of the vertebra. And now, because we are talking about the sympathetic nervous system, this ganglia is therefore called sympathetic ganglia or sympathetic chain, or in other books you hear sympathetic trunk. The essence of these preganglionic fibers will go and end there, but they are carrying impulses. So the impulses have to be relayed to another structure. And then other structure which those impulses will be relayed onto are what we are calling the postganglionic neurons. So that means that the neurons of the postganglionic, they are mostly situated within the sympathetic ganglia or sympathetic chain. So when the preganglionic release the neurotransmitters on them or the impulses on them, now the impulses will now be carried by the axons of the postganglionic, and they will send it to their various effector organs. So smooth muscles, cardiac or glands, as explained. So that simply is the pathway for the sympathetic impulses arising from the lateral gray horn. They are carried to the sympathetic chain or ganglia. From there, the postganglionic will also pick the information and now send it to the various structure. Now, remember that this chain we are talking about is extending from T1, T2, T3, T4. In fact, it extends just right from the base of the neck. But the lateral greenhorns are mostly found on the thoracic segment, down all the way to the sacral segment. So, the postganglionic that are found within the thoracic segment, most of them will end up synapsing on the effector organs within the thoracic region because the preganglionic fibers, they end up relaying the information to this postganglionic within the chain. When you come down to the abdominal and the pelvic regions, the preganglionic that are arising from the lateral greyhound, they sometimes extend beyond the sympathetic chain and go onto another ganglia. And these ganglia are what we call the collateral ganglia. So meaning that these collateral ganglia are not part of the sympathetic chain. However, they are lying very close to the viscera or the structure of concern. So the preganglionic will end up there, and the postganglionic will arise from those collateral ganglia and go and supply the viscera, mostly when it comes to the abdominal viscera and the pelvic viscera. That is for the sympathetic nervous system. I don't know whether I should still talk about the parasympathetic.
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's on do.
Yes, sir.
For the parasympathetic, their preganglionic fibers are mostly at the S2 segment, S3 segment, and S4 segment of the spinal cord. What it means is that on those segments, the lateral greyhound contains cell bodies of parasympathetic preganglionic. So with this you are seeing here, it's just trying to mean that this is a sacral segment of the spinal cord. You are seeing the lateral horn, the preganglionic of the parasympathetic are rising. For the parasympathetic, they don't have anything called sympathetic chain. No. All they have is a ganglia, which is like a relay station. And these ganglia are lying very close to the organ, which is the end focus. So for example, here in this structure or diagram here, the erectile tissue of the penis is the focus. So the relay station, he is very close to the erectile tissue. So the preganglionic will end up rightly at the ganglia closer to the effector organ. And obviously, as you have described, the autonomic nervous system in general has two pathways, the preganglionic and the postganglionic. Therefore, the postganglionic of the parasympathetic will also arise from the ganglia closer and extend to the effector organ. Because the paraganglia is closer to the organ, the postganglionic or the parasympathetic nervous system, they are usually short, as we are seeing from this very particular picture over here. That is for the spinal segment. That's the S, sacral S2 to S4. We are also seeing that there are also some preganglionic fibers that are found amongst the nuclei of certain cranial nerves. The third cranial nerve, the seventh, eighth, the 10th. These cranial nerves extend outside the cranial cavity to various organs. The vagus nerve, for example, extends through the neck, passes through the thorax, and goes as far as the abdominal cavity. So it's the longest of the cranial nerves. Because it bears fibers of parasympathetic, preganglionic, as this vagus nerve extends, it carries parasympathetic influences. And when they get closer to the organ of concern, the postganglionic will arise from there, even as we see shortly, then innervates the structure of concern. So that is it for this whole ganglia thing you are hearing. It's simply a collection of cell bodies outside the nervous system. And for the sympathetic, that ganglia outside the nervous system is called or ascribed as the paravertebral ganglia, or the sympathetic chain, or the sympathetic trunk, or the sympathetic ganglia. Thank you. Please, any other contribution from anyone again? Okay. Someone is asking, where will you classify the enteric nervous system? Please, can someone help us? Someone is asking, where will you classify the enteric nervous system? Okay. Adan Esinamzan. Let's say, Madam Esina, your hand is up.
Hello.
Yes, yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I had wanted to ask a question, but with the question on the ground, I think it will be under the economic.
The enteric will be under what?
Economic.
The
Economic nervous.
the autonomic.
Yes, yes.
Well,
And then I have a question.
well, I would say I differ from that, from what our textbooks are saying. Say the enteric partly is like an of sorts, a partial kind of independent uh, nervous component. So, however, it's classified because it's outside the central nervous system. In some books, you will see it being placed under the peripheral nervous system of sorts. In some other textbooks, they will say, or other forms of peripheral nervous system. Um, so if we are to put it as such, well, to be on the safer side, I will say I'll put it that as a peripheral aspect as far as the uh, entire nervous system is concerned. Because remember, when it comes to the enteric nervous system, it's not only about motor. there are sensory informations too as well. So for example, when you eat, your stomach, that is your stomach, like that muscular sac we saw, it will distend, and obviously it will put pressure on the nerves that are within its walls. This pressure on the nerves will send a sensory information, and this sensory information will go and cause a cascade of other impulses to come back as motor, which will cause the release of gastric juices like secretin or cytocystokinin or gastrin. And these juices will mix with the food and as well cause the stomach wall to also contract and relax so as to churn the food. So it is not only autonomic, it is not only motor in function. If it's only motor in function, then if you say autonomic aspect, then fine. But it has a sensory aspect, it has a motor aspect. Therefore, I'll put it under the peripheral aspect and not solely autonomic. Thank you. Madam Zano, let's hear you. So you were asking your own question.
Okay, so uh, and the neurotransmitters, you said that
Okay.
both the parasympathetic and the sympathetic ganglion, they produce um the, if you could say that like
Um, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, they are preganglionic secrets the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. What's for the
uh,
postganglionic of the parasympathetic, it still secretes acetylcholine. But when it comes to that for the sympathetic, their postganglionic secrets
uh,
no epinephrine.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I will ask that we will end the class as far as the nervous system is concerned. In fact, it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting whole system. But when someone is talking like this, if you have not read a little kakra, that is why if you look at it, when we're talking about the digestive, urinary, and other system, I didn't really give you for you to uh, solve the internet before teaching because they were straightforward. But for the nervous system, I intentionally made it so that you have a fair idea of what is in there. So when I'm talking, doesn't become something new. So I'll suggest that you pick your textbooks, any anatomy textbooks, and as you read, I'm sure um, it becomes simpler. If perhaps it looks complicated by the way I did go about it. Having said so, we have more time. So just to help ourselves and not while away the time, let me let's try and do something different. People, let me say that we have to write our examination, midterm exams. So please and please, you have to give me uh, a period, a date which we can have our uh, mid semester examination. I think it's very necessary because the more the weeks pass by, the things are becoming plenty. And the more plenty it is, the more the work will be when it comes to examination. So I'll kindly ask that classes you discuss amongst yourself and kindly communicate we which week we should have our exams. Ladies and gentlemen, I think let's look at a different system altogether, the reproductive system. A very simple system because it's obvious and visible.
So my hand is up, please.
Me too.
Mr. Sumala, okay, let's hear you say.
Okay, sir. Say, alongside your lecture, you're talking about the sympathetic and parasympathetic system, where some part of the organs, sympathetic will work at the same time, parasympathetic will also act. But you mentioned somewhere in the blood where you see that when parasympathetic will work, but parasympathetic will not work there. I didn't get it there. But if you look at the system of blood control, when somebody is high or when the system somebody is active, is parasympathetic that is sympathetic that is taking place. But then when you want to calm the system down, that is parasympathetic that is taking place. But you said in terms of the blood system, the parasympathetic is not taking place. I need a little more clarification.
Okay, thank
Have
you,
you got
Mr.
my question?
Sumala. Yes, please. I got your question. Hmm. Yes, we did explain that commonly the sympa and the para have opposing effects. But there was also a key thing to say that not all structures do have a sympa influence at the same time para influence. So you brought the example of the blood vessel. Structure-wise, as far as the autonomic nervous system is concerned, it has sympathetic fibers synapsing on the receptors of the smooth muscles found within the tunica media of the blood vessel. Influence of the sympa will cause these smooth muscles to contract, decreasing the lumen. So vasoconstriction will occur and blood pressure will increase. Now, you gave the example that in case when someone is active, obviously, there will be a lot of blood flow to the muscles.
12 no akwatena hɔ no mo 1
Yes,
2
you
3
are right.
4 5 6 7 8
But
9 ansa na apaka
get to know that blood flow is not only an activity resulting from blood vessel constriction. It also is an influence from the heart, which is the pump of the cardiovascular system. Now we have established that for the heart, it has both a sympa influence and a parasympathetic influence. So when under situations of activity, the heart will pump faster because the sympathetic will cause more influence on the cardiac cells. And there'll be more supply to the person's muscle. In addition to that, the sympa will still also be having an effect on the smooth muscles of the blood vessels. But when a person stops the activity or exercise, the parasympathetic will come into play. But its influence will be on the heart to decrease the heart rate, one, and to decrease the force of contractility. However, that influence of the para on the heart, it will not be the same influence on the blood vessel because there are no parasympathetic fibers attaching to the receptors of the smooth muscles within the tunica media of the blood vessel. So it's simply the inhibition of the sympathetic on the smooth muscle of the blood vessel. Then the opposite, the opposite effect is that, then the muscles will say that the force that is causing us to contract is no more there. So let's relax. So the muscles will relax on their own, but it is not under the influence of a parasympathetic effect. The effect of the para is rather on the heart as a pump, but not on the blood vessel, which is a channel for conducting the impulses. Yes, Amala, I don't know whether you can get it clear from my explanation here. Or you have a different opinion. Mr. Smiler. Oh, are you with us or is gone? Okay, so thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, as for the reproductive system, thank you very much. I hear something simple, and I'm sure we may not have to spend much time.
So can I come with mine?
Your hand is up again. Okay, let's hear you, sir.
This is not Smiler, this is a different person.
Okay, let's hear you, sir.
My question is in relation with the enteric nervous system. I want to clarify, and books that I've read were actually classifying it under the autonomic nervous system as being 3 sections under it. So to understand that, we're saying that it should rather be placed under the peripheral nervous system as a third part and not under autonomic nervous system.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my question. I want to clarify that.
So you are clarifying that it should be placed under the autonomic and not the peripheral.
Yeah, certain books that I've read were actually saying that the autonomic nervous system, under it, we have the somatic, the autonomic, and then the, how do you call it, the enteric.
Okay. So, well, thank you very much, Mr. Michael. That classification may be there. But I am reasoning in light of the fact that has an independent, partially independent nervous system of salt. There should be a sensory component as well, in addition to the motor component, which would be necessary for the whole system to function properly. So, by virtue of, for example, the example I gave, if you have food within the stomach, the walls of the stomach distends. This is a stretch reflex, which will stimulate the nerve cells, which are sensory.
Yeah.
By this sensory information, it will end up causing a motor impulse to come in play, where the body will say that, oh, okay, there's food within the stomach. So now let's cause the release of gastric juices. For example, gastrin, or for example, secretin, or cholecystokinin, if, for example, it is within the duodenal regions. And so I'm raising the light that there should be a sensory impulse to pick these impulses before the motor comes in play. That is why I'm saying that, well, if you put it under peripheral, that would be easy and more better to encompass everything. But if you are seeing some books saying that it's solely autonomic, then fine, that's fine. But I want to reason that then where would the sensory aspect come in before the auto will also follow?
Sure.
Don't worry if I'm asking any question. But if I'm asking any question in examination, then I will make sure that the generally agreed things from all the textbooks across are what will be asked in the examination, not something that may be quite dicey.
Okay. The truth is both has been sent. Another book also said just what you are saying, classifying it under the periphery. And then
Okay.
so coming up today, I wanted to take advantage of the opportunity and then clear my doubts with the two books.
Okay, sir. Thank you,
Thank you
Mr.
very much.
Michael. Okay. Productive system. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have done about 4 systems so far. This may be likely the fifth system, if my memory serves me right. We established previously that characteristics of living things, in short, is Mr. Niger from elementary biology or SHS. All living things exhibit Mr. Niger, where M for movement, R respiration, and nutrition, I irritability, R reproduction, excretion, and the like respiration. So the human as an organism also reproduces. And basically, the specific cells involved are the sperm cell and the ovum of the organism. The sperm cell is also ascribed as spermatozoa, and the ovum is also ascribed as the oocyte. These are haploid in number, meaning they bear 23 chromosomes. It is until fertilization, that is when the zygote will now bear the 46 pairs of chromosomes. Ladies and gentlemen, we have the male reproductive and we have the female reproductive aspects. As usual, the males are very simple. So we may take the opportunity to look at that. This encompasses the testes, the ducts, the glands, and other supporting structures. So the testes obviously is a structure we see lying within the supporting structure called the scrotum. Whilst the ducts includes the epididymis, the vas deferens, the urethra, which we will get to look at it. The male reproductive system is basically for sperm production and sperm transmission into the female. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to pick these structures one by one. Let's talk about the scrotum. This is an adult class, so I'm sure that my descriptions will be nothing new to us, because one way or the other, I'm sure that we have been exposed. Even if you have the opposite sex, one way or the other, I believe that you may really appreciate my descriptions in whichever form. So for the scrotum, it's a fibromuscular sac, and basically it contains the testes and some portions of the spermatic cord, specifically the lower portions. It hangs just below the pubis symphysis. I'm sure we all know the pubis symphysis from Anatomy 1. Let me ask, let me see. Mr. Sumala. Mr. Sumala.
Sir.
It is said that one side of your scrotum is lower than the other. How true is it?
Okay, sir. Scientifically, it's true.
Scientifically, it's true. And practically,
Yes,
practically as well.
That is also true.
That is also true. So which side specifically is lower and which is higher? Desmela, let's hear you.
Let
Which
me
is
check it
lower?
well. Let me see.
Oh, you want to check it
Sir,
well?
it's the left is lower than the right.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. He has confirmed it, so I think I'm able to go. So, people, this is an attempt to just help us to appreciate. And I'm sure that if you are to talk to our sisters, if you have to talk about the breast to us, well, I'm sure they also tell us that there are sometimes disparities in terms of one being lower than the other. So this is just let us appreciate the left side as compared to the right side. And we are seeing the skinny around the scrotal area looking rugrous, something like wrinkles of sorts, and also bears hair structure on that. Ladies and gentlemen, a key thing to also say is that the appearance or the posture of the scrotum will differ in situations of weather changes. So warm weather has its own posture that the scrotum will assume, whilst cold weather also has its posture that they assume. Mr. Somala. Mr. Somala.
Sir.
Please help us. Is there changes in the scrotum in case of weather changes? So let's say hot weather and cold weather. Do you see differences in terms of the posture of your scrotum? Mr. Somala, are you with us?
Yes, sir. There is changes, sir. It shrinks.
Yes. So can you help us? What
when the
changes
weather
do you
is warm,
see?
it's like
When the weather is
kind
warm,
of
what
dilate.
happens?
Yes, sir.
When the weather is warm, what happens?
When the weather is warm. When the weather is warm, it's kind of let me say
it descends down.
It's flattens.
It seems you don't have an answer for
It's
this.
kind of dilated. If it's cold, it's like it shrinks.
It's straight. And when it's cold, what happens? When it's cold, what happens?
It shrinks. I mean,
It shrinks.
It comes together. Yes, please.
Okay. It seems our sisters even have more answers to us than us. Thank you very much, Mr. Smala. Thank you, Mr. Smala. I appreciate that.
With hot weather, it detaches more from the body.
It does what?
With hot weather, it detaches more from the body, and then with cold weather, it's more attached to the body because of its required temperature it needs.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kingsley. I appreciate that. So that is exactly so. Sperm production requires some unique temperature. It should not be too high. It's not supposed to be too low. So in hot weather, already the body temperature already is high. So if it gets closer to the body, if you don't take care, in quotes, it may cook our sperms. So to avoid that, it descends further away from the body, so as to have a temperature quite optimum for it. Whilst the opposite is in cold weather, the temperature may be too low, and therefore it wants to make use of the body's temperature by getting closer, so as to get a good temperature for its work. This contraction and relaxation is by a muscle called the dartos muscle, which runs within the wall. There's also another muscle called the cremasteric muscle. In fact, this muscle descends from the abdomen as the testis descends through the inguinal canal into our scrotum. I'm sure we will appreciate it in other pictures that I have down there. Let's talk about the testis. An ovoid structure. It is an endocrine structure, and it's also a reproductive structure. And when it comes to sperm production, that is the reproductive function. And when it comes to endocrine function, it produces the hormone called the testosterone. It is about 4 to 5 cm in terms of length. When you take a cross section through the testis, you are going to see a beautiful appearance as this. There is a coating, outer coating called a tunica albuginea. This casing, double layered of sorts, extends into the cortical aspects or the medial portions of the testis, dividing the testis into lobes, about 250 lobes. Within these lobes, we are going to see worm-like tubules called the seminiferous tubules. Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to sperm production, the specific structure within the male reproductive system responsible for sperm production is the seminiferous tubule within the testis. Now, let me say something interesting. A cross section through the seminiferous tubule, this is how you're going to see it to be. Within the seminiferous tubules, there are a lot of germ cells. But primarily, these germ cells arise from a mother cells called the spermatogonia. So this spermatogonium acts like the grandparent or the grandmother or the grandfather cell. It is this cell that will divide to give us small daughter sons. And these daughter sons will also give birth, also divide and give us children sons of sorts. So spermatogonia, which is the grandparents, mostly they are found closer to the periphery or attaching to the wall of the seminiferous tubule. So they will undergo mitosis. So they'll give us two daughter cells. And these two daughter cells will also undergo further cell division again. And they'll produce a different generation. And that different generation will bear a different name called primary spermatocyte. This primary spermatocyte will also undergo cell division and give us another generation called secondary spermatocyte. These secondary ones will also undergo cell division and give us another third generation called spermatid. This spermatid will also undergo cell division and give us another generation. And these are what we basically call the sperm cells. So they are the last generation, which are as a result of the modifications of the spermatids. Ladies and gentlemen, these subdivisions that takes place from the spermatogonia are what results in the spermatozoa, which is the sperm that we do know. And these are within the seminiferous tubule. But within the seminiferous tubules, there are also other cells called the sustentacular cells. These sustentacular cells they act like the neuroglia we saw in the nervous system. Neuroglia, what do they are supporting cells, they provide nourishment and other stuff. So this sustentacular, their main function is that they nourish the spermatozoa that has been produced. Now, there are also other cells called the Leydig cells, which are commonly found within the connective tissues surrounding these seminiferous tubules. These Leydig cells are the cells that produce the hormone called testosterone. So, ladies and gentlemen, from my introduction, I said that the testis is a reproductive organ and it's also an endocrine organ. The specific cells within the testis, which makes the testis as endocrine and as reproductive, are what I have just explained. The spermatogonia will give us divisions resulting in reproductive cells, while the Leydig cells will result in testosterone production. It is this testosterone that is responsible for the male sexual characteristics, as we see. So broad chest, deeper voice, and you look manly of sorts by this hormone. What we see here is the spermatozoa that has resulted from the viral cell division that have undergone or that has happened. Ladies and gentlemen, I will end my discussion here. I am out of glucose. I pause here. If you have any question, you can ask. My sustentacular cells are not nourishing the entire body. So we have to end the lesson.
Hey.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, sir, we are enjoying it.
Thank you, sir.
Hey.
We are enjoying this one, sir.
The time runs so fast, sir.
Sir, the
Sir,
pregangrenous.
let's close at
Enjoy
8.
in neighbor system.
Please.
Do reproductive care, we enjoy.
Let's close at 8.
See you alive.
The gangrenic was staring at us, but this one day we are
You can continue, we beg.
Ladies and
Let's
gentlemen,
close at 8.
Let's close at 8.
Reproductive system, we beg.
Good time, women.
We'll continue next week.
I want my date. My date presentation.
Please, the slider. Sir, please, get in the slide.
You will get the slide, don't worry. So
Thank
my
you,
examination.
sir. God bless you.
Okay,
I will expect my examination
like
in the
to
course.
learn. We beg you.
I wish you the best. Enjoy and have a nice weekend.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you, sir.
you.
Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
sir.